We are going to look at something. I've alluded to it a couple of times, the 144,000 in Revelation. But tribulation Jews, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. There's very interesting things about this. These cults lose their minds over the 144,000, from Jehovah's Witness, and they're not the only ones that, they just think what it is. But the Bible clearly tells us what they are, but there is some interesting, the more you, especially now, if you're trying to understand prophecy, and in the day in which we live, prophecy is becoming more and more relevant, to study. So these people are mentioned in the there you go. Revelation 7:3 through 4. You can follow with me. We're going to have it on the screen as well. When we're introduced to him here, a lot of things are going on in the book of Revelation, but it says, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of God in their foreheads. Can you get that? You can put that up? Is it up? It usually looks different than that, that's all. You got them? Oh, you got them both? Okay, good. Good for you. All right. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. So that's who they are. There's 140,000 from the tribes of the children of Israel. If somebody's trying to make them Christians or anybody else, Gentiles, they're wrong. And that's usually the route a lot of Bible interpreters go. That's just too bad. All right, and the next one, slide 2. Of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Asher were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Nephthalim were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Manasseh were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Simeon were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Levi were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar, sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000. Of the tribe of Joseph were sealed 12,000. And of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. What's curious about that, and the Bible, God's being very specific, is the tribe of Dan is missing. So why is Dan missing? That's the curious, at least, part of this that we have to get into. You see, because as we're going to learn, these tribes are all mentioned again in the millennium when they're distributing land at the end of the millennium, and Dan's back. In the book of Revelation, in chapter 7, is during the tribulation. Okay, so that's dispensationally or historically, that's before the millennium begins. Everybody following that? That's before. So what happened? Why and God has substituted the tribe of Manasseh in Revelation 7. He substituted the tribe of Manasseh for Dan, and Manasseh was one of Joseph's sons. So when God does things like that, it's up to us as Bible students to, how come? You should be curious about that kind of thing. So what happened between tribulation and the end of the millennium where Dan's back in? All right, that's what we're going. Yes, Joe. It is something to do with idolatry. We're gonna. I think we can nail it down here in just a second. But why is Dan missing from the 144,000? We're going to start in Genesis 49, 1 through 2. The only reason I was asking Tim about this is because normally this was black for the people watching at home, but now it's different. Okay. Huh? That they're reading on this? Okay. All right. In Genesis 49:2, this is when Jacob, Israel's very small. There's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob, his name is changed to Israel. Jacob has the 12 sons. And the names of those boys are the 12 tribes of Israel. And he calls everybody together. Jacob's getting ready to die. And he gives this prophecy. He gives this blessing / prophecy about these sons. And it begins in 49:1-2. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Now, in Judges 18, 17 and 18, if you're going to do some private study on this, and I encourage you to do this, read Judges, the book of Judges, chapters 17 and 18, because Judges is a very interesting episode in Israel's history. Right? It's like a 300-year history, and a lot of things a lot of weird stuff happens in the book of Judges. Joshua has just brought them into the promised land. That's how it begins, and they're distributing the promised land to the 12 tribes, and it takes a while. And they go really backslidden. Israel goes really backslidden, and a lot of things happen. In fact, one of the key interpreting verses, it says a couple of times, it says, in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. That's a good verse for America right now, too. Everybody's doing what they don't care what God's saying, they're just doing what they want to do. All right. In 17, though, something happens in 17, Judges chapter 17, where there's this man named Micah. Micah says unto him, Dwell with me, and be unto me a father and a priest, so I will give you 10 shekels of silver by the year, and a suit of apparel, and thy victuals. So the Levite went in. Now let me give you a backstory on this, because if you're not familiar with it. There's this man in the book of Judges toward the end in chapter 17, and his name is Micah. And Micah is setting up a false religion, is what he's doing. And he's got a lot of idols and things like this. And there's a wayward Levite is traveling around, and he stumbles upon the house of Micah. And Micah says to him, finds out who he is and everything. And Micah's excited that the guy's a Levite, because the Levites, of course, had special priestly privileges and honor according to the law. And the priest says, I'm just traveling around. And he goes, well, why don't you stay here with me? And you're a Levite. You can be a priest. None of this is from the Lord. You can be a priest, and you can be a father to me and a priest. And, we can get this religion, there's already people have interest in it, and I think it'll really take off. And so that's how it started. But what's interesting from a spiritual perspective is that's the first time in history that a religious figure was identified as the father, okay? Which the Bible says, call no man on earth your father. And it's clear in a religious sense. We're not talking about being a dad, okay? But you're not supposed to, your religious elder is not your father, So anyway, that's where it started. Right there. And it starts there, and he says, and you'll be a priest, well ordained a priest under our own order, and we'll give you even a special suit of clothes. You can wear these black robes, and you be a father and a priest unto us. And the Levite says, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good deal. And he says, I'll even pay you. So it starts. This is the house of Micah's religion. Okay? So that's interesting. Now, the story gets more interesting. By Judges 18, it says 18:1, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in, for unto that day all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribes of Israel. The tribe of Dan still doesn't have all their property rights. Remember, if you remember, when Joshua brought them into the promised land, they were saying, okay, this territory is for you, this tribe, and this territory is for that tribe, and on and on and on. Well, they've been there like 100 and some years, and Dan still doesn't have all his property yet, because they've been backsliding, and everybody's, Dan hasn't, up until now, hasn't been worse than anybody else. But Dan's about to get worse than everybody else. All right? Again, I want you to read chapters 17 and 18 in the book of Judges. And if you really want to, I actually wrote a book called Judges Rule. I cover this extensively in that book, in the book of Judges, what's happening here. So that's what's happened with okay. Now, the Danites are seeking more inheritance. So they send this like scouting team ahead of this is a different story, and they happen to stumble on the house of Micah, just like the Levite priest did. Micah, the Danites stumble upon this house because they're looking for a property, and they recognize this priest. Hey, we recognize that guy. What are you doing here, buddy? And the priest says, well, I was traveling around looking for a place to, trying to get where I'm going to live in life, and I stumbled here, and they asked me to be their priest and their father, and I'm the head of this religious order now. And the Danite says, well, that's pretty impressive. We're looking for our inheritance, and the priest says, yeah, I know you are. And he goes, well, the Danites say, well, you pray for us, and the priest doesn't pray. He just says, go ahead and do what you want. God will be with you. All right. Well, the Danites, to kind of make a long story short, the Danites go out to a piece of property that they're eyeing, a region, and they're very successful. They conquer the people, and before that happens, so they go back and tell to get more soldiers. Okay. And they said unto him, hold thy peace, lay thy hand upon thy mouth, go with us and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for thee to be a priest unto the house of one man, or that thou be a priest unto a tribe and a family in Israel? See, what's happened now, when those guys that scouting party went back and found more soldiers, got more soldiers, like 600 Danite soldiers came through the land, and that scouting party said, here's the priest that we were telling you about. He's the guy that said, go ahead and God will give us victory. And sure enough, that's what happened. So we like this guy. All right? So now the soldiers say, well, why don't we just bring this priest with us? See, right here, he's a priest to the house of Micah, but he's not a priest. He could be serving more people, for the good of the people. He said, we should take him. So these Danites go into the house of Micah, which is a cult anyway, and they take the idols. They've made an image, and they take the image, and then they take the priest, and they said, you're going to be our priest now. You can live with us. And there's some resistance, but the priest is, he was just serving like maybe a small local church or something. I'm going to make a comparison. And he says, well, man, there's only about 100 people come here. If I go with these guys, I got, thousands of people in the congregation. I got more money. I got, more prestige, more religious power. So anyway, that's how this new religious order begins. And the Danites are in charge of it. Okay? The Danites are in charge of it. So remember, we're looking at what happens. This is before the age of kings. This is before anything, after Moses has even happened. So this is what's going on. All right. and the children of Dan, they argue to him, you should be a tribe to all of us, not just one family. And they say, and the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. Now, that verse right there, this false religion that has the father and the priests, this is for Israel now specifically, this is going to be in operation until the captivity of the land. Now, here, that's quite a statement, and it's easy to pass over. When is the captivity of the land? There's only two possibilities for this interpretation. One is at the end of the age of kings, when God has the land conquered by Gentiles and Israel gets dissolved. They go into a Babylonian captivity, and there is no more kingdom of Israel, because then when the New Testament opens up, remember they're back in, some of them are in Israel, but there's no more kings or anything like that, and they're really a slave state under Rome. And the captivity again, they go into complete captivity at 70 AD, and we go into the diaspora. So here, the two possibilities for the captivity of the land is like 600-700 years after they set the religion up, when they go into the Babylonian captivity, or it starts in 70 AD and doesn't end until 1948. The point is this: Dan's a mess. All right, and it doesn't stop right there either. But until the captivity of the land, that defines how long this operation is going to continue. That defines it. Dan's apostasy continues throughout Kings. Now, 1 King, something happens in 1 Kings. I realize I'm summarizing a lot of this, but you know, when Israel does set up kings, remember, God didn't even want that, you know, and the people insisted. So he gave them King Saul, and then King David, and then Solomon. And then after Solomon, after he had a son, but the country went into civil war and became two, it divided into Israel and Judah. All right. Now, remember, this apostasy, this false religion is operational all through Kings, including David and Solomon, which can be overlooked easily. It says this, you know, we just read in Judges, this thing remained a sin to them. This false religion was in operation until the captivity of the land. And that's certainly through all the age of Kings. So, whereupon the king, but under this, about 120 years after they set up kings, there's this civil war, and this king named Jeroboam says, you know what? I know God divided this nation, but I'm worried about people trying to get back together, so I don't want them to go back to Jerusalem to worship. Even though there was two nations, Kingdom of Judah and Kingdom of Israel, there's still only this one religion, Judaism. So King Jeroboam, he says, I don't want that to happen because I'm afraid that everybody will get back together and there'll only be one nation again. Because he didn't believe what God said either. So, whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, here come the holy cows again, and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel, and the other one he put in Dan. All right? Because Dan's already established as a false place of worship. So Bethel, it's too bad. Bethel's got a rather sordid history too. But Dan wins for being the worst. And Dan, this false religion is already established over there. They put this image there, and they say what Jerusalem is to Judaism, now we've got Bethel and Dan is to this apostate religion. Okay? But it's Dan that set up, I'm not going to talk about Bethel right now, I'm just focusing on Dan. Right? They put these cows there, and then they made he made a high place, and he made the priests the lowest of the people that were not of the sons of Levi. So he expanded it. He said, we're going to expand these, what the Danites have done. We're not just going to limit it to Levite priests. We're going to select whoever we want to be priest. Right? And Dan says that's fine. So, and this thing lasts for hundreds and hundreds of years until the Babylonian captivity, until the 10 tribes are dispersed into Assyria. It took, you know what, when those golden cows got taken down, that 10 of the tribes of Israel are worshiping, they didn't get taken down, they got taken down by Gentiles after Israel was conquered. Right? So, it stayed an apostatized, it stayed a cult-like religion for 1,000 years. All through that time. And Dan was basically headquarters for the religious end of it. All right. God sort of summarizes this up when the nation's going into captivity. Howbeit from the sins of Jeroboam, he's the guy that set up the 2 golden cows, the king, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, Jehu departed not from after them, to wit the golden calves that were in Bethel and that were in Dan. And in Amos 8:14, they that swear by the sins of Samaria and say, thy God, small g, O Dan, liveth, and the manner of Beersheba liveth, they shall fall and never rise up again. This is at the end of Israel's kingdom age. But Dan is restored in the millennium. Now these are the names of the tribes from the north end to the coast through the way of Hethlon, as one goeth to Hamath, Hazar and Enan, and the borders of Damascus, northward to the coast of Hamath. For these are his sides and west, a portion for Dan, and by the border of Dan, from the east side and to the west, a portion for Asher. All I'm showing you right there is that Dan is back in opportunity and back in good standing with God. Now, we're out of time, but I'm going to summarize this real fast, and then we'll go over it again next time, what has happened. When does Israel get saved? During the tribulation, right? During the last time. So, but Dan's not part of the 144,000, but it's happening in the tribulation. By the end of the tribulation, Dan is in good, all of Israel is saved. All right, so now they're back. That's why Dan was missing during the beginning of the tribulation, because they weren't in good standing at all. You know, they were worse. None of Israel was really in good standing, but Dan's in total apostasy. So they don't come back in until they don't get completely right with God, that God accepts, until the millennium. I hope that makes some sense to you. It's kind of complicated. But that's why you probably never heard a sermon on what happened to Dan in 144,000, right? Because it is a little complicated, and you got to. But they went into apostasy in Judges chapter 17 and 18. They solidified that apostasy in the age of kings with the golden cows set up in the city in Dan, and they stayed that way until the captivity of the land. Which means right up, all that stuff was happening through King David, which is amazing. Through King Solomon, and then and there's who knows what's happening now. Then they go into dispersion into the diaspora, but they don't. It just doesn't all get fixed up until the tribulation for Israel. So that's why Dan's missing. It's because of their total apostasy. And this ties into another lesson I'm going to give you, identifying the Antichrist. The Antichrist will no doubt be from the tribe of Dan. Because Jacob said in that prophecy that we read at the beginning of this, in Genesis 49, when he got to Dan, his blessing, he says Dan would be a serpent in the way. So, of course, the serpent is one of the names of the devil, too. Dan would follow the devil more than the other tribes. So, if this is the first time you heard it, you're probably just going, man, that's pretty wild stuff. But we'll go through it again, And if you want to read it, it's in the book of Judges.